Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here today. When we talk about emerging markets, our focus is usually on the breakneck expansion we're seeing in these economies around the world today. And very often we spend a lot of time talking about the cost of this growth, the impact modernization, urbanization, industrialization is having on our food, our water, our air, our environment. And these are all very legitimate concerns because, yes, these things are having an impact on the air we breathe, the food we eat, etc. But the good news is that there are people and companies committed to reducing the impact. And we're delighted to have many of these people on our panel today. Let me introduce them to you. We have with us Peter Lacey, Managing Director at Accenture, Mr. H.M. Nerurkar, who's the Managing Director at Tata Steel, Prem Jain, the Chairman of the Indian Green Building Council, and we have Sean Wall, Senior Vice President of DHL Express Asia Pacific. I want to keep this dialogue between all of us, not just here, but all of you, quite lively so that we can have an engaging discussion so that when we end, all of us can walk away with at least one new idea about how to make our lives, our businesses, just that little bit greener. So I will throw some questions to our panelists here. I won't let that go on too long. I'm a journalist, it's my habit to ask questions. I can go on and on, but I hope to open it up to all of you very quickly. So do feel free to take your notes, make your, scribble your questions. You will get a chance to ask our panelists whatever you want. I wanted to begin with you, Sean. And I have to say, when I saw that DHL was on my panel, the first reaction I had was, oh God, he's got a tough one. A lot of explaining to do. Being in the logistics business, transport, planes, trains, motorbikes, cars. Now, you yourself have said that the transport sector accounts for 13% of global greenhouse gases. What is DHL doing to bring that down?
Well, first, thank you very much, Malika, for that question, and thanks very much for the B4E committee and the distinguished guests for inviting us. On behalf of Deutsche Post DHL and DHL India and Blue Dart India, we're very honoured to be part of this summit. What are we doing? Well, it's a great question. We have a 220 country global network, so a huge footprint, and that obviously means a huge carbon footprint as well. And we take seriously our commitment to the environment. And in 2007, our chairman, Frank Appel of Deutsche Post, he had a vision, and he said, we are the 6th largest private employer in the world. We have nearly 500,000 people and 254 scheduled daily flights. We also have over 40,000 vehicles and many more facilities. And his vision was that we put together a plan to reduce carbon emissions across our company by 30% from 2007 to 2020.
It's an ambitious target.
It's a big vision. So you need a vision and you need a target for that vision. The next thing we did was put together a global system, which is a data repository. Every manager and every supervisor in our network can put in their fuel consumptions, their invoices from suppliers, and their energy consumptions in one single data repository. Because we firmly believe that if you don't get the right data across the world, you're not measuring the right thing. So we did that. They were the three first things. Lastly, we put together a plan. We refleeted all of our aircraft, and today we have the youngest aircraft fleet in the industry. We also have vehicles which are Euro 5 plus, and we make sure that we keep our vehicles new and that they can really save money and be good for the environment. And last but not least, through the people. We communicated right down to the ground, so our couriers and our customer service people know exactly what we're doing. We can give driver training, we do. We can give smart methods of how to pick up a package, put it in the vehicle, turn left, get to the customer. which really saves time and money and also is very good for the environment. And all in all, them actions have seen us reduce our carbon emissions to date around 12%, and we're well on our way to our targets for 2020.
12% already, it's a great start.
Yeah.
Mr. Nerurkar, I wanted to come to you. Now, as someone in the steel business, of course, manufacturing steel requires an enormous amount of energy. And again, you can't help it, but carbon dioxide is a natural byproduct of the steel making process. What's happening in the steel industry to fight that, to bring that down?
Let me give you a brief introduction about the steel industry, and then we can talk about the actions which are being taken.
Sure.
Globally, steel industry produces about 1.4 billion tons of steel, and 45% of that is consumed only in mainland China. 65% of the steel produced is used for infrastructure development, and most of it, as you know, is in the emerging economies, the new infrastructure. So, basically steel is an everyday item, and even if steel is actually used as a 100% recycled material, you still have to produce steel from virgin ore because the steel industry is actually growing at the rate of 3 to 4%. Coming back to the CO carbon dioxide emissions, which is the main issue, steel industry has reduced the consumption or emissions by about 50% over last 30 years. But still the figure is quite high, which is 1.8 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. If you look at the study of various international energy associations, I think a 2010 study showed that steel still contributes about 6.7% of the total CO2 issue of the world. So it's a massive problem, but considering it's a everyday use item, it's still 6.7%, and that's what the industry is addressing. As I mentioned, since already 50% has been reduced, it's quite difficult now with the improvement technologies to reduce consumption, and you require some breakthrough technologies. Now, for breakthrough technologies, an individual company finds it extremely difficult because they are quite expensive. So, World Steel Association, which represents most of the important steel making companies, has a program going on where all of us contribute. All the major Indian steel companies are also part of that. And more importantly, it's a research program world over being conducted simultaneously on different aspects in Japan, in Europe, in North America, and partly in India. And our results are shared so that the industry can come up with carbon capture and storage technologies for achieving the further breakthrough results. Coming back to recyclability and its use, steel in many ways has become economically friendly. It's best recycled material, it's almost 100%, and people came up with innovative technologies so that the zinc or the tin with which it is coated is removed before, so that it doesn't vaporize and go in the atmosphere. The second work steel industry has done well is to capture all the byproduct energy, so that you really don't waste anything. For example, in our company, we don't buy any petrofuels, though there is a lot of heating or energy requirements, all byproducts use that. Plus, the waste material, which is the iron making slags, are used for cement making 100%. The steel making slags are used replacing aggregates. So you really don't have to then use natural resources to, that way you save them. And third is of course the technological or product innovations, which are mainly in the areas of product development, making the steel high strength, low cost, and how it can be used more efficiently. The examples are, let's take electrical steel. The kind of reduction in the electricity consumption which has been achieved in transformers or in motors due to development in electrical steel is phenomenal. Similarly, the weight reduction in automotives or in buildings because of the high strength steels which have been developed is also phenomenal. And as a result, there has been a great saving. In fact, there is no systematic data, but the kind of CO2 emissions which have been saved are certainly more than what the steel consumes. But you can't calculate or take credit for that. So this is the work which steel industry has done. And later on when we go along, I will talk about what Tata Steel has done particularly or what it is doing for the society. Thank you.
I want to talk about green buildings. And I've read that India has around 2,000 registered green building projects. The fact that there are any registered green building projects is great, but 2,000 in a country of 1.2 billion people, that's such a tiny number.
Yes.
Why is that so small?
Okay. Malika, the question is very valid. In fact, our 2,000 building got registered only yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we reached the figure of 2,000
Congratulations.
buildings yesterday. The important thing is that we have now reached a point of 1.4 billion square feet of building being registered with the council. We have a problem because the buildings are generally by the builder. When the builder makes the building, he or she is not going to use it. He or she will make the building and set it off or lease it, and somebody else will get the benefit. So money is invested by the builder or developer, the benefit is derived by the user. So there is a paradox. How we have been able to achieve the 1.4 billion square feet is by coaxing the builder and the developer that it makes business sense to make a building green. When we started our journey about 10 years ago on Clinton Challenge, it was very expensive to make it green because we had no products available in the country. The council, which is part of the CII, has been able to encourage many developer builders in the country to set up their own manufacturing plants. Like you see about the Tata Steel, they use almost 30% recycled material, which was not always the case. So we have been able to promote with the developer builders, with the manufacturers and all, to come out with more green products. I was delighted to hear Mr. Ramdurai's presentation in the morning when he told us that India has to grow 4 times. That means in 2030, there will be 4 Indias built. In 2050, there will be 5 Indias built. Enormous challenge. Why we have been able to do only so little? 1.4 billion is okay, but it's only 5% of what I am building. So what we are doing is we have now fallen back to National Building Code of India, which is the main source of information for municipalities. We have had really very poor incentivization by the central government, by the state government. That means at the top of the pyramid. But we had amazing success with the municipalities, bottom of the pile. So if I can go to the municipalities and encourage them to make green, which is what we are doing with the Nation Building Code, then we see a revolution coming in the country. Otherwise, my 1.4 billion may become 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, unless the municipalities own that they have to make it green. So what I have been involved in the last few years, and now it's already there in the Bharat Darshan, we have an addendum to the Code of India, National Building Code of India, which is right now being printed. 3 months down the line, it will be available to the municipalities across the country. And we are hoping they will all use that as a base for approving plans of the new building coming up. You can then see the revolution. That means by 1.4 will then become probably 25 billion by the time I come to 2025. So India has to build. We don't have a choice. So our hope is that now, with or without the government's incentivization, we'll be able to bring the country up in using sustainability in the buildings.
Great, thank you. Peter, you've heard from people in three different distinct industries. What do you think? What is the state of play? Have we seen real progress in the green space?
Well, firstly, let me say it's wonderful to be here. Although I live in Shanghai and London, it always feels like I'm coming home in India, particularly with Extension now. We have more than 80,000 people here, so it's lovely to be here. I think it's a great question. I think the answer to the question is that we have made progress. I think if you look at any of the numbers around renewable energy, energy efficiency, better management of water, waste, etc., there are some positive trends. And I think there is a growing awareness amongst policymakers and businesses that this is a set of issues that we need to tackle, that we need to get hold of. I was in the US last week with President Calderon, the outgoing president in Mexico, and he used the phrase which I really like, which is that the idea of a trade-off between green growth and economic development is purely a false dilemma.
You can have both.
There's no, not only can you have both, you have no choice.
Right.
As a policymaker trying to prepare your country for the future, as a business trying to prepare your corporate strategy for the future. So I think there has been progress. I think you look at the growth, for example, in renewables. Last year we saw somewhere around 300 billion, depending on which figures you look at, invested in areas like solar and wind. But then when you look at the amount of installed capacity, and actually renewable energy is only one part of the green growth story, but when you look at installed capacity globally, and you look at the fact that we have more than 5,000 gigawatts of installed capacity globally, and even as fast as solar and wind are rising in terms of importance, are rising in terms of investment, together they still make up less than 5% of the global energy mix. So we really are finding progress is still not getting to scale at speed and isn't taking place at the transformational pace that's required in order to manage this complex trilemma. I actually don't think it's a dilemma. I think President Calderon's wrong. I think it's actually a trilemma, which is how do you balance the rapid urbanization that we're seeing, the rapid economic development with the resource scarcity that we see and the environmental degradation, and how do we move to a world where those things actually reinforce each other positively rather than at the moment what we see is still, unfortunately, in most cases, pilot paralysis and a lack of scale.
Lack of scale, I want to get to that in a minute, but you raised a very interesting point about what the president said. You don't have a choice. He doesn't have a choice. He's the president of a country. Of course, he has to push for economic development. Of course, he has to push for greener growth. But as people who are leading corporations in business, you all do have a choice. I mean, okay, these days the pressure is on to go green, but you know, there is a choice you can make when it's about chasing profits and about being green. I'm just curious how this plays out in your companies. Say at Tata Steel, for example, how do you balance chasing a profit but also keeping a very keen eye on staying green?
I think, as rightly mentioned, it's a trilemma and there is no choice really.
There is no choice.
You got to have a green growth, and that I think there is no other option. And what the steel industry has done, or what we have done in particular at Tata Steel, on many respects, some very simple and some quite technologically innovative solutions. Simple solutions, for example, we use lots of local resources rather than buying them from a distance, thereby reducing the transportation costs and the emissions. We have, for example, shifted most of our traffic to rail than to road, because rail is on electricity to that extent more efficient than the diesel, as we heard in the some of the previous speakers talked about. The second is, how do you maximize the waste utilization so that you can conserve the natural resources. So 100% of our iron making slag does go to the cement industry, which we have encouraged to be right next door. Third item where we have done is this product development. We talked of this all high strength steels for the automotive, by which they can reduce their weight, they can reduce the emissions. And while these technological innovations are difficult and do require a lot of skills or technology to come to a particular level, ultimately these products always are sold at a premium and always are sold consistently. There are no ups and downs. So to that extent, your profitability is always protected. Okay. So these are the different approaches. And on the fourth area, which is, we are quite fortunate to have our own raw materials. And a very special research programs have been done to improve these raw materials so that the overall cost of production comes down. And the last example which I mentioned earlier was about when we started actually removing the zinc, removing the tin from the steel. It actually was looking like a more expensive technology, cost to the company, blah, 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 blah. But once the prices of the commodities went up, which is zinc and tin, actually it is more beneficial to know to recover than to recover the scrap. So, you know, sometimes it can result into a different economy altogether.
Sean, y'all are investing very heavily in being green, but sometimes, the returns, I would imagine, take years. So it's not a quick fix. It's not like you put in this much, you get this much back right away. So how is that viewed within the company?
Well, yeah, first of all, I agree with Peter. Companies have got no choice, right? We have to take a leadership position, and I think with Frank Appel's leadership we have, and it was said that in a recent report that 63% of businesses would pay extra for carbon products. So, for example, we sell a service to the banks, a la Standard Chartered Bank, where the cost of carbon of that shipment moving through our chain is offset with a carbon project. So I think businesses will pay. Going back to us as a company, we have to take a leadership position. And within the Deutsche Post board's plan is what we call the 3 pillars: go help, go teach, go green. And within the go green arena is all of the things I talked about earlier, which have to be baked into your strategic plan. And you have to take a long-term position. So for example, in our hub in Shanghai, we have a series of solar panels on the roof. That's a massive investment, which won't get paid back for maybe 15, 16 years. And we should not take a short-term view on the profits for a long-term, sustainable view on committing ourselves to the environment. So yes, there is a long-term position to be had.
Peter, you brought up scale, and one area where I think scale can really make a very quick difference is in housing. Coming back to you, Prem, there is a view, it is expensive to have a green building. It definitely costs more to have, green housing or green cities, for example. What are you all doing, or how can we move towards that? Because in a country of 1.2 billion people, the potential is huge to have greener buildings.
You're right, Malika. The challenge has been the extra cost of going green,
right,
compared to a conventional building. If I were to buy a house or a home, I pay X amount. What do I pay if I want to buy a green home? By consistently working with the developer, builder, and the manufacturer in the country, today I can say with great satisfaction that the delta cost that we have to make the home green or the office green is come down to 2% of a properly designed conventional building. Now the 2% is paid back within less than 2 years. What we are looking for is, if there was some incentive available to us to ward off the 2%, and I'd like to share a story with you. I operate from Noida. I chair a very large company called AECOM. They're the world's largest consulting engineer. We have a green building, platinum green building, and we are consuming 40% lower energy than the next door fellow. The Noida authority actually came to arrest me because we must be stealing power. We have a large building. Why are you paying 40% of what the next door is paying? So we showed them around the building, and they went back very energized. And Noida is the only authority, mind you, in the country which allowed me 5% more FAR if you make a LEED gold building. After seeing my building, it has done wonders for me in Noida. What it did was, every developer, small, big means like Wave and Delhi One, 80 million square feet, they're all getting 5% more FAR for going LEED gold. Now, this is an incentive we are begging the government to implement in the country. Everybody is a winner because the developer gets more area to build on the same land. Land is very expensive. The user gets 5% more, pays much less energy, has plenty of water available to us. So what the mantra has been with the council, that we are approaching the municipalities and the local governing bodies, give us little incentive. Don't give me a subsidy. We don't want money. Charge me less if I am doing something better. It's proven extremely well for us that a green building, LEED gold, will consume nearly 60% of the energy of a normal building, 40% saving in energy, 30% saving in water, no waste. So there's established case studies with us all across the country. Nearly 300 buildings are operating like that. So what we are trying, the council is trying across the country, is to go into the local bodies and saying, incentivize. If a man makes a LEED gold building, give him little incentive, maybe 5% more FAR is a gold mine for a developer. When I do 1.4 billion square feet, you can imagine the additional amount available to me by 5% more FAR available. That has been our most successful method so far of making sure that India becomes green, that whole country becomes green, because if the affordability is only 2% more and I get this incentive of the 5%, the developer can knock out the 2% because he is getting 5% more FAR to build in. So today we have in Noida buildings available to me at the same price as a normal building will be, because developer is getting this additional benefit from the municipalities. And we are trying something similar with the lower power tariff, maybe lower insurance rates. So once that becomes more adapted in the country, I think we'll have a revolution in the country in terms of going green.
Peter, can good green business, or in this case, a green certified building, a gold or platinum certified building, how can this enhance or affect profitability and, of course, even the reputation of a company?
Well, Malika, I think let me give you two answers to that. I think the first one is picking up on Dr. Jain's point around green buildings. It almost speaks to President Calderon's false dilemma again, because you can almost remove the word green and actually say efficient buildings or efficient asset. And for example, to your point about profitability, if you look purely at capital expenditure, you get one answer. If you look at capital expenditure plus operational expenditure for a building, you get a different answer. And if you look at the total life cycle cost of a building, you get a different answer again. So to give you an example, the average building, 70% of the life cycle cost of a 25 to 30-year building is going to be in the operational expenditure. But when we're building the building, we're very fixated on the capital expenditure. Whereas if you insulate it properly, if you properly invest in renewable resources, you can not only manage the relatively short term, but also you manage the risk of that asset for its full life cycle. And I think there probably isn't anyone on this panel, and I would imagine not many of you in the audience that don't imagine that the world is going to suddenly become less resource constrained, or we're going to see less intense regulatory environments. So even if you can make the economics add up now, you see it even more so in the future. So that was the first answer. I think the second answer is each 3 years for the last nearly 10 years now, I've led a study for the United Nations Secretary General for Ban Ki-moon to try and help him and his leadership team understand CEOs' changing views on sustainability. And the last study we conducted was back in 2010, and actually we're just starting the next one now, which will be presented later on this year at the UN headquarters in New York. And what was really interesting in 2010, to your point about the business context, is that 93% of the 766 CEOs that we spoke to in 2010 said that they saw sustainability as being important or very important to the future context of their business. What's also interesting with your point about trust and reputation is that although that is a key part of the driver for most of those businesses, increasingly they're shifting away from it being a reputation or communication issue to being about growth and innovation, to being about cost reduction and efficiency, and increasingly risk management. So I think there is a growing shift amongst leading companies that, again, looks at this not as a trade-off, not as a social investment, but actually as a primer of competitive advantage.
So something that's fundamental, very core to the business,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Like you said again, we don't have a choice. All of you have said that we don't have a choice. Time now to open it up a little bit. Anyone here with some questions?
Good morning. My name is Jay Kumar. I work with International Development Enterprises India. My question is to representatives from Tata Steel and DHL and Accenture. As they mentioned the initiatives that are going on within Tata Steel and within DHL, I got concerned about the particularly in DHL, when they said that they remove the old fleet, and then the old fleet is bought by another operator, and the vehicle is still on the road. So DHL has been able to reduce its own carbon emissions, but they transferred it to a low price operator. And similarly in Tata Steel, steel is a growing industry, and they are able to reduce their own carbon emissions, but on the whole, it indirectly contributes to more steel consumption in terms of their profitability. So it's a less carbon intensive fuel, but more and more steel is being used. So what these companies are doing in terms of reaching out to the other stakeholders like consumers or their supply chain or general public, what Tata Steel and DHL and even Accenture as an IT company, they also have a carbon footprint. While they're consulting on sustainability, what is their own carbon footprint? Are they carbon neutral? Is there a plan to be carbon neutral in the next 10 years, 5 years? That is what I think.
Sean, do you want to take that first? What do you do with your old fleet when you retire?
Well, I think thanks very much for the question. I hear your concerns on moving on aircraft into different fleets. Again, I think we need to take a leadership position, and I think we are. First of all, by refleeting all of our aircraft. We go across the Atlantic maybe 4 times a day from Shanghai, which not only costs a lot of money, but it also actually is a huge carbon emission. And what we need to do as a company is make sure that when we refleet our aircraft or our vehicles, we make sure that we don't put all of them back into the general fleet. But you know, this is global trade, and there is a market for that lower level. What we need to do as an industry and our aviation industry is make sure that the planes which go to different companies have got the most up-to-date noise reduction capability, and they go in for checks, and they have to get to the most up-to-date standard within the industry. So that's what we can help with.
Your turn.
I think you mentioned about the growing consumption, and that there is no doubt. For example, if you saw the Hitachi presentation, the India's consumption was shown somewhere around 55, 60 kg per capita, whereas the global average is 220. Developed nations is somewhere around 400. And that is required because, as you heard about from Dr. Jain or Mr. Ramdorai earlier, the country will require plenty of infrastructure. There has to be a standard of living which is the aspiration of the developing world, which needs to be met. So what the industry can do is, how do you minimize your own generation so that the growing aspirations of the developing nations or emerging economies is met, at the same time you don't load the planet with that much of emissions. Now that's a compromise, or that's a competing requirement. As I mentioned, if steel industry had done nothing, let's say in 30 years it has reduced to half. So if the consumption goes double, we are still same as what we were 30 years back. But that's not enough. What we need to also do is to come up with lots of innovative design solutions working with the customers, so that we can actually reduce the consumption also to a significantly low level. I think these are the actions in which, if we don't operate, you cannot have the same consumption and expect the developing world to meet the same standards. That's a kind of a competing requirement we have to face, and that's what we are doing.
Peter, there was a third part to that question about Accenture's own carbon footprint. Do you want to take that?
Well, look, I think it's a really interesting point, because the premise of the point is that actually this actually is an issue that affects all industries. If you look at the direct impact of a business like ours, which is management consulting, technology, and outsourcing, the direct impact relative to an extractive industry business or a transport business is always going to be lower. We don't have trucks and sheds, and we don't have large-scale manufacturing. Actually, I think the onus is more on our sector to some extent to provide the solutions and to provide the innovation that helps to empower other sectors. So, although it might not be as obvious in terms of the pressures, we don't get the sort of the NGOs perhaps lobbying us. I think the real secret is that the opportunity is there for our sector to play an enormous role. I was in Japan last week with our team in Japan, and we were talking about why it is that sustainability matters to our business. And our chief executive, Pierre Nanterme, has said that he wants it to be one of the 3 things that we are famous for by 2020. I think this speaks to Sean, to your point about vision, driving an organization. But then you need to interpret that vision, and it needs to kind of cascade through the organization. It needs to mean something to everyone at every level. And what was interesting is that my response to why we should care is that if you look at Accenture in the 1980s, we were 20,000 people. We're now 280,000 people. A few billion in revenue, now more than 30 billion in revenue. And ultimately, we grew on the back of being able to help our clients with 2 key trends in the 80s and 90s. And those 2 trends helping them to transform globally. One was actually the shift to global companies, the shift from large national champions or regional players to global companies, which need global strategies, global supply chains, global technology. There's actually some of the similar trends that others have tapped into. And then the second trend was the shift from an analog world to a digital world. So the shift in information communication technology. And we help them, again, to go through that process of integrating technology into the business and driving business results. My response to my Japanese leadership and colleagues was to say that this sustainability trilemma, this issue of rapid urbanization, resource scarcity, and managing the environment is the next disruptive trend in the global economy. For the technology sector, which potentially has the chance to drive technologies that create efficiency outcomes that help to connect the world digitally, dematerialize, etc., or just use resources in a smarter way, we should see this again as not only our responsibility, but also an enormous opportunity.
There was a question right here.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Damandeep. I work with an NGO called CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, and we work with a lot of the companies that are represented here on the panel and so on. I have 2 very quick questions. One for Peter. The question is, are you happy with the pace of change? Our global research, and we work with the global 500 companies, and over 85% of them respond to us. What we find is that they're not doing enough. While they're saying that they're doing, if the rate of change needs to be 4% in emissions reduction per company globally, we find that it's almost 1/4 that. So how do we drive that? And to Mr. Nerukar is, as an Indian multinational, what is your response as a multinational steel giant that's based out of India? How do you respond to this sort of global concern, whether the West should act first or India should act first, and this false dichotomy that's ought to be created? Thank you.
So I think the short answer is no. I don't think that we should be satisfied with the pace and scale of change. I think I started off by making some of the points, for example, about renewable energy still being a drop in the ocean relative to fossil fuels, and you can take that pretty much in any of the different fronts. So no, we're not doing enough, and we're not doing it quickly enough. And I think that there are a series of reasons for that. We were working last year, well, we obviously have a very close relationship with you and with CDP. We were working last year with the World Economic Forum to try and unpack what would be needed to go to scale at speed in a program that we called More with Less. And I think what's very clear is that you need to move the system at the same time. You can't just focus on demand, you can't just focus on supply or on policy. You need measures on supply, demand, and policy. And actually, we're not very good at that in terms of global policy, and certainly business is limited in its influence. And I think we're going to have to, in the next few years, recognize that we have reached pilot paralysis and that we have reached the limit of incentives in some sectors, and that we're going to need to think about how to move through that with a series of system solutions. I think The other thing I would say is this panel is very much about emerging market leadership. And I moved last year from running our Europe, Africa, Latin America business out of London to now running our Asia Pacific business down in Shanghai. And I think one of the things that I am cautiously optimistic about is the wave of innovation that is coming out of the emerging economies. And I wouldn't necessarily say you could argue or describe that as leapfrogging yet. I don't think that's true. But I do think for all sorts of reasons, the lack of legacy infrastructure, the extraordinary pace of urbanization, for example, in Asia, that actually that probably holds the key going forward. And I think businesses like Tata, for example, when I was here last time, I was here with Dr. Irani, who I think was one of your predecessors a while back at Tata Steel, but also companies like Tata Motors, who are recognizing that not only is there a domestic opportunity, to your point about global businesses, to get it right in India, but also if you take something like electric vehicles or you take the disruption in transport systems, no one owns market leadership in those spaces yet. The Tesla or whatever, it's all up for grabs. So if you're someone like a Tata Motors thinking about how you move into other markets around the world, or if you like the sort of the reverse growth into the developed markets, a lot of these spaces, technology leadership is not certain, and actually there's a real opportunity there.
That leads in very nicely into the question that was for you about leadership, and can a company like Tata, can India take the lead, especially when it comes to innovation?
You know, each country, we are in India, we are in Southeast Asia, we are in Europe, as you know, and customers all over. And each country has its own special requirements to innovate and to conserve. For example, Singapore is a very small city-state. So any construction going on in Singapore has to be significantly different than what happens in India, where you see lots of activities being done at the construction site itself. So that team had to do a lot of innovation, almost like a mechano set, and you take it to the site. And there is a lot of learning from that, especially for us in India, in the bigger cities. And we are already, as we get more and more multinational contractors into India, that technique is finding its way into construction. Coming back to Europe, Europe likes to lead. And there are, of course, certainly differences of opinion how much leadership Europe should take, because it also has a tremendous level of cost implications. And we must all realize that the world actually needs a breakthrough technologies and innovation to conserve the resources, that there is no doubt. But none of it comes fast, or none of it is very cheap. So that's why there is a combined force in Europe and globally, which we are working together to come with the innovative solutions. Advantage of all this is, even while you are still waiting for that breakthrough technology to go down from 1.8, let's say, to 1.5, you still have lots of smaller innovations which can help the entire industry. And that's what we try to do for our Indian operations, learning from what we do in Europe. So that's the way we, and most important what we have done is, for environment and for CO2 emissions, we have only one group which works across. So even if there are local differences, the knowledge is shared right across so that everyone benefits.
I think we have time to squeeze in just one more question. There's a hand. Okay.
I'm Harshad Gandhi from Excel Industry, and we are into solid waste management since last more than 20 years. It's more of a sharing, and probably the corporate has a larger role to play collectively. Municipal solid waste in India accounts for about 120 million tons of GHG emissions per annum. By thumb rule calculation of 1 ton of municipal solid waste generates about 2 tons of CO2 equivalent. What we feel is this, there are solutions available for waste composting at community or the household level. So micro measures can lead to macro impact. Probably if it can be incorporated in the corporate CSR plans, probably collectively we can make a difference in the way the solid waste management issue we are facing today in India. It's more of a sharing, and probably corporate may have the role to play.
There was one more question.
There was one more hand right there, yes. And after this, we'll have a quick wrap.
Hello, I'm Salil Gupta from Mecaster Tools. The question is to Mr. Marurka, MD Tata Steels. So you have talked about decreasing carbon effects and all during transportation. What about production? Where ore is used, there must be some sludge left out, some waste left out. How is it that Tata Steels is going about trying to use it as some beneficial product?
Is the question clear to you?
No, sorry, could you repeat that one? Sorry, we're not
I'm
very
just
clear
asking, during the production time,
yeah,
the waste that is left out,
the waste that is left out.
waste
Yes.
during production, the sludge,
Yes.
Slag, yes.
how is it being used to convert into some useful material?
Yes.
How is the waste being treated?
As I mentioned, we have two types of slags or the waste generation predominantly in the process. One is during iron making and one is during steel making. Rest of it, there is no slag generation. The entire iron making slag today is used by the cement industry. The steel industry has come up with a slag granulation process, and the slag can directly be used by the cement industry. So, there is 100% usage. The steel making slag, however, there is a partly being used as a recycle during the process itself, but majority is used all over the world as a aggregates. So, you find in India many times people are breaking hills or exploding hills and getting those aggregates for the construction. You use the steel making slag properly graded. In fact, if you see, let us say countries like Thailand or countries like Australia, many of the highways or the airports have been built with these aggregates. So, these are perfectly safe to use. There are practices in the world and one can recycle most of it. So, that is why for the steel plants now gradually there is almost a condition coming that you need to recycle or zero waste solid waste. That is the kind of restriction which will come and which is quite natural, and you have to abide by that. And the industry has reached almost to the use of almost 97 to 98% reuse. We have to bridge that last 2 or 3%.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.